Jeopardy? People actually like Jeopardy, right? I mean, it's not been the same ever since Alec passed away, right? It's just not the same. There aren't enough Saturday Night Live skits about Jeopardy anymore. I don't often watch it, I'll be honest. I don't. The only time I watch Jeopardy, this is maybe kind of embarrassing, is like when I'm getting ready to watch Survivor and it's on before Survivor starts. It's filler. Hey, here's the thing though. I get sucked into it. When Jeopardy's on, it's hard for me to turn away because I want to know if I know. I want to know if I know the answers. Most of the time, it's a big fat goose egg. I have no clue. Every once in a while, though, I'll get something. I want to know if I know the answers, or maybe more correctly, I want to know if I know the questions. Because that's what makes Jeopardy different, right? It's not about finding the answer. You're given the answer. What you have to do on Jeopardy is the opposite. You got to find the right question. You got to end that statement with a question mark. Sometimes the question is just like, you can just change your tone, right? Just lift it at the end of the sentence. That's a question. That's not just a novel feature for a game show, but I believe actually that figuring out the right question is essential for our own spiritual formation as well as our own emotional maturity. For us to be formed into the likeness of Christ and for us to be maturing in our faith, in our own lives even, maybe what's more important than finding the right answer is asking the right question. You see, what shapes us, what forms us, what defines us is less often the answers that we get and much more often the questions we ask. Because the questions that you ask necessitate, they shape the type of answers you're going to receive. If you ask one question, you're going to get a different answer, but if you ask a different question, guess what? You'll get a different answer. Our questions shape our imagination. One of my favorite quotes as of late has been, "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." That's kind of silly, but it's kind of like that with questions too. You ask stupid questions, you're going to get stupid answers. Even more important than getting the right answer, I believe, is asking the right question. What shapes us as a people, what shapes us as a church, are the questions we ask, because our questions will determine where we look. The question you ask will shape where your eyes are looking, and it will shape what you are seeking. You know, Jesus said, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you." Do you know what he wasn't saying in that? He wasn't saying, "I'm your magic genie who's going to grant you all the wishes you want." He wasn't saying, "Hey, I'm just going to give you what you want. You just got to ask." Jesus was saying that the things you're looking for will be the things you find. The things you're looking for, you're going to find. If you only have eyes for drama, guess what you're going to see? Drama. If you're asking for trouble, you're cruising for a bruising, right? If you ask for trouble, guess what you'll get? What are you looking for? Because chances are that's what you're going to see. On what doors are you knocking? Because chances are those are the only doors that are going to open. And those are the questions that we ask. That is, Jesus is saying we need to be intentional about the questions that we ask. Because those questions are shaping us. So today I actually want to revisit something some of you may remember. Maybe not all of us, because it was 8 years ago. The year was 2015. I was 28 years old. Oh, man. I had been your pastor for about 7 months, 9 months maybe. This church called a 27-year-old pastor fresh out of seminary. I know why you call a pastor fresh out of seminary. with no lead pastor experience. This church at the time, we needed to reset some things. We needed to ask different questions. In 2015, maybe some of you remember, we were asking questions like, are we going to make it? Asking questions like, how do we get more people into the building? Even asking questions like, what does survival look like? We needed to ask some different questions back then. We needed to return to some fundamental Christian questions. And back then, we spent a whole year, maybe you remember, a whole year on the phrase, yes is the answer, what is the question? That is, 8 years ago, we said we were going to be a people who said yes, but we were going to be a people who said yes to the right questions. Not yes to anything, yes to the right questions. And all the other questions, we could put those in God's hands. And guess what? We're doing it again today. We're doing it again today, not because I've lost inspiration and I just want to rehash old things. Actually, I wrestled for months about what this annual meeting was going to be like. But because we're at a point where in the life of not just our church, but in the church in general, I think we're at a point where it's okay to kind of hit that reboot button again. I remember my first video game console, the Nintendo Entertainment System. You had to blow on the cartridge to get it to work. It had that reset button. And every once in a while, if the game froze, what did you do? You get real upset because you made all this progress. And then you hit the reset button. We're doing it again today, not because I've lost inspiration, but because I think that that's where we are again. And truth be told, not because of anything we've done. I think that this is what has happened to the church because of the world in which we have it. Our context has really affected a whole lot of things. You know, this year was supposed to be the first full year after the pandemic. This year was supposed to be the first year that we could move on past COVID. I mean, it's still here. We have some folks who are not here today because of COVID, actually. But life was supposed to return to normal, right? I don't know about you guys, but very little about this last year has felt normal like it did before 2019. And I talk a lot about that more so in the annual report packet. That the world changed and it really brought out a lot of questions. Well, things really reset over the last few years, and churches were being asked and were asking themselves different questions. Churches were really wrestling over the last few years. They were asking questions and being asked questions about, well, what political posture are you taking? How is your decision being affected by your politics? Assuming that churches were operating from a political alignment rather than a kingdom alignment. Churches were being asked of themselves so many questions. And if I can be completely honest, there was absolutely zero way to win during that season. There was no winning. No matter what position we took on anything, we were going to be in the wrong to some people. There's no way churches could win, which is really hard because we like wins. We started asking different questions than we had asked before. We started asking questions like, how do we make digital worship feel normal? I'd never asked that question before. And the truth is, we still ask that question. We were asking questions like, are our people going to come back? Is there going to be a massive migration between churches right now? We were asking ourselves, what are finances going to look like when we're not together? What are finances going to look like when we have a dispersed people? We asked different questions that we didn't think that we were going to have to ask. And now these are all important, and truth be told, they needed to be asked. But now that we're on this side of the world shutting down, I think we're still asking those questions. I think our imagination is still lingering in that space a bit. And so today I want to see if we can't reframe the questions we're asking again. You see, this is what it means to be the church. To be the church is not to say that you're not going to stop asking questions and you're not going to stop wrestling to find the right questions. You see, that's why we read from Romans 11 today. Romans 11, chapter 17, verse 24, we read a passage about how God has grafted others outside of the Sinai covenant into God's tree. The branches had been cut off because of their unfaithfulness, and other branches had been grafted in. Spoiler alert, these are Gentiles, not Jews. These are folks who don't adhere to the law of Moses. And in case you didn't know, that's us. That's y'all. We have been grafted into God's covenant community. The church is the community that has been grafted in. God made room for those of us outside of the law of Moses through Jesus Christ. No longer limited by heritage or genealogy. What does it mean to be a part of God's covenant people then? Well, there's a reason that people refer to the church as the new Israel. That might not be my favorite terminology because I think we need to be intentional about not being anti-Semitic. But God's name for God's people, Israel, is a name that has been transferred to the church because Israel is what we call God's people. And Israel, historically and actually in Hebrew, is not a proper name originally. Israel is a phrase. It's a sentence. Is-ra-el. It's 3 words. Is-ra-el. In Israel, Israel, it means simply, he wrestles with God. He, Ra, wrestles, El, God. This was the name that Jacob received after his divine wrestling match. He spent all night wrestling with this divine person. And after that fight, he was given a new name and a limp on the hip. He was given a new name to signify that he was someone who was not giving up the fight. That he was not someone who was going to let go of that wrestling match. And do you know what the name for God's people became? The name for God's people was not, they have answers. The name for God's people was not, they have it figured out. The name for God's people was Israel. The name for God's people was, you keep fighting. You keep wrestling. Israel was not the people that had everything figured out. If you read through the Hebrew Bible, through the First Testament, it's kind of plain that they were not a people who had everything figured out. Far from it. Israel were not a people who had all the answers. Quite the opposite, in fact. They had very few answers throughout their history. They screwed up a lot. There's a rabbinic tradition that says that one of what made Israel, what separated them from others was that they were faithful about recording their unfaithfulness. They were faithful about recording their unfaithfulness. That they did not forget the times that they had failed. What made Israel was not that they had everything in place, not that everything was perfect. What made Israel was that they would not give up the fight. So that they wouldn't stop wrestling. What made Israel Israel was that they kept clinging to that divine wrestling match. So then Paul says that the church has been grafted into that covenant. What does that say about who we are? What does it say about the church? I mean, the church then is the place where people go to get all their answers, right? You go to church because that's where people have it figured out. You go to church because they've got everything, all their ducks in a row at church, right? Come on, our church has all our ducks in a row. The church, guys, it's a glorious church without spot or wrinkle, right? It's the hymn we sing, right? Now, friends, it would be wonderful and incredibly convenient if the church was a place where people could go to get all the answers to all the questions they had. That'd be great. It'd be really convenient, and it'd probably be a whole lot easier to grow a big church. As an aside, I think that's sometimes what the expectation of the church is. That the church will be a place where people have it figured out. That the church will be a place where people will be perfect without spot or wrinkle. Which is why we're so surprised when we have church hurt. Because we don't expect it to come from there. But I want to remind you today that to be the church is not to be a place that has everything figured out and has all the answers. The church is the church. The church is a new covenant people because, like Israel before us, we don't give up the fight. We don't stop wrestling. You know, the church is a stubborn people who will not stop asking questions of God. You want to know what it means to be the church? To keep wrestling. And do you know what wrestling looks like? It looks like asking God questions. Like our Hebrew predecessors before us, and like one of their fathers, Jacob, we just don't stop wrestling. One of my favorite scenes from The Office is Jim and Pam, husband and wife. They're having a tiff. They're having a long, drawn-out fight between husband and wife, and The Office is doing a good job of having us wrestle with the question, are they going to get divorced? And they have this conversation where they talk to somebody else who is divorced, and he said, you know, the problem wasn't that we were fighting all the time. The problem was when we stopped fighting. That's when I knew the marriage was over, when we stopped fighting. So then there's a scene where Jim and Pam are leaving the office on Valentine's Day, and Jim cancels a trip to go home to stay with Pam. And Pam says, are you sure you want to go home? We're just going to fight. And he said, put up your dukes. We're going home. Which is a way to say we're not giving up the fight. The problem wasn't that they were fighting. The problem was when they stopped fighting. When they stopped wrestling. You see, we were grafted in because others stopped asking questions, because others stopped wrestling. And Paul was clear to tell us in Romans 11 that, hey, guess what? If you do the same, you might be grafted out. And I got to flip back here because it's so good. I love that he says, God has been kind to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. I saw a few shirts this morning that said, be kind. So, church, this year, we're going to keep asking questions. We're going to keep wrestling. And we're going to reframe our questions a bit. We know the answer. We have the answer. What's the answer? Yes. The answer is yes. Yes will be our answer to God, but we need to know the questions. The questions we need to say yes to are not, how can we grow a big church? The questions we need to say yes to are not, believe it or not, how big of a reach can we have? Do you know how tempting that is for pastors to feel like they have a reach? Now, the questions we need to say yes to are, will we love God? Will we love others? The questions we need to say yes to, the questions we need to ask are, will we engage our community? Will we serve our community? Will we welcome our neighbors? Will we build bridging relationships with one another? Will we belong to each other? Will we become who God calls us to be? If you didn't catch where those questions come from, I encourage you to look in the foyer at our watchword and our missional movement. We will say yes to being a covenant people who prioritize worshiping together and eating together. That's why we're eating together today, church. Who eat together, who play together, who pray together, who disciple together, who raise our kids together, who lean on each other in hard times, and who celebrate with one another in good times. We will say yes to being an authentic community. And this year, we'll also say yes to our children. You know, one of the hardest hit areas of ministry over the last few years, not here, mind you, one of the hardest hit areas of ministry over the last few years was children's ministry. As I wrote in the annual report booklet, this year was one of the busiest years on record for families. It feels like the pace of life just won't stop accelerating. And if you have little kids, it's just busy. It's just busy. I mean, that's another reason that Kayla and I are moving back to Hastings. Because the pace of life is just so much. And as you all are aware, the Adventure Kids space, the wing down there, has been under construction for quite a while now. And I'm grateful to everyone who's given their time and sweat to work on that space. And we have some money designated from insurance from a flood we had to renovate that space, and we have plans to renovate it, clean it up, and make it a special place for the kids, and we're going to get on that ASAP. But we don't just want to finish that space. We want to finish and furnish it. See, we want to make that space a space that communicates something to all the families who bring their kids here. Now, you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. The building is not the church. We are, y'all are, right? The church is not a building, it's a people. That being said, our space communicates something about our values and our priorities. Our space communicates something, and right now, it's communicating construction. And that's okay. It's okay. So we want to not only make the space safer and more usable for kids, that's one of the great motivations for renovating it, is that we need to have a space that is in line with our Nazarene safe expectations. But that's not it. We want to make that space excellent. And we want to furnish it excellently. At the end of every board meeting, I'm sure they get tired of hearing this. I've used the same benediction every board meeting. From 1 Corinthians 15, therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Excellence is not perfection. Excellence is not even pristine. Excellence is being the best that you could be. So this year, for the first time in years, I am excited to announce a new capital campaign. For the first time, it's been over 4 years now, well over 4 years since we've had an intentional project for fundraising like this. And this year we want to raise funds to finish and to furnish the space that is dedicated to our adventure kids. And our goal this year is $20,000. That may sound like a lot, but when you get into what it looks like to finish and furnish that space, that $20,000 could go quickly. And if I'm honest, this is why I don't know if you've seen this, I'll hold it up because it's really dorky and really cheesy, amateur Lego, what is this, like a couch? It's like a chair, couch, love seat. What? Double-decker couch, yeah. It's a Lego couch, and it's just a visual aid for us. But there are roughly 200 Legos in this couch. There are roughly, because I couldn't make it exactly, but I counted them, there are roughly 200 pieces. When you come in next week, that won't be there. Or in the foyer, which is where we might house it. A piece might be. Maybe a couple pieces will be stacked together, but it won't be complete. Not until we reach our goal of $20,000. And each piece will represent $100. So as we make progress towards our, did I do that math right? Yeah, okay. As we make progress towards our $20,000 goal, you'll see that piece of furniture grow, which represents for us the furnishing of our kids' space. And it might sound like a lot, but we can do it. I know we can. Do you know how I know we can? Because we've done it before. Back in 2015, we set a goal of raising $20,000 to pay down the principal of our mortgage. And as I was told later in my ministry here, some folks thought that was crazy. And maybe it was. But we did that then with half the people, and when our money didn't actually turn into anything new. We were just paying off what we already had. Now, our dollars will go to work. Now, when you give, it will be going towards something fruitful for the kingdom, for the discipleship of our children. The phrase, yes is the answer, what is the question, and the goal of $20,000 are not the only things we're going to revisit this year. As a way to say that we believe in you and to say that we believe in your ability to support this project, we're going to invest in you. And I mean that quite literally. 8 years ago, we did something crazy. When we were trying to raise money, do you know what we did? We gave it away. And we're doing it again. Maybe we're still crazy. Maybe we're still nuts. Maybe we want to lead with generosity, but today we're going to be passing the plates one more time. In just a moment, the ushers are going to come forward and they're going to pass the plates, only this time, instead of putting money into the plate, I want you all to take money out of it. Everyone here is invited to take one bill. It's not a ton of money. It's going to be a $10 bill. To take that $10 out of the offering plate. And we would like you to take that $10 and to find some creative way to multiply it. And whatever you generate from it, we ask that that gets given back to the church for the finishing and furnishing of our Adventure Kids space. And I mean, we're not giving you a ton of money. We're not giving you guys a whole lot. $10. What can you do with $10? I'll tell you what you can do with $10. One of the most beautiful things about the reverse offering from 8 years ago wasn't even the money that we raised. That was great. That was good. And it set us on a good trajectory financially with the bank. But what made that reverse offering so special were the stories that came out of it. Reen LeClear, homebound now. She came on the annual celebration in 2015. She took that $10. She bought yarn. She bought enough yarn to make some hand towels. And then she sold those hand towels. And she gave Kayla and I one. And then when she sold those hand towels, she reserved a little bit to buy more yarn, but the rest of it she gave to the church. Then she reserved what she reserved to buy more yarn, she made more hand towels. And then sold that, reserved a little bit for yarn, made more hand towels. And I'm not joking when I tell you that for years, Kayla and I received a hand towel from Rain LeClaire. We still have some. For years, that $10 turned into her supporting the church, well beyond that capital campaign. The stories of Sonia and others in the church buying the ingredients to make pasta, and then taking that pasta and selling it to her friends and families, and giving the excess back to the church. I could tell you so many stories. Cinnamon rolls. People made cinnamon rolls. People would have bake sales. They would do what they could with their $10. And do you know what's amazing? God was faithful, and that $10 turned into $20,000 in 7 months. Amen. Church, yes is the answer. What is the question? We're going to keep wrestling. We're going to keep asking. And we're going to keep loving. Especially our little ones. Especially our kids.